We are jumping back into the action now here on the show, and we're continuing our series that we started last week with talking about some of the early impressions, some of the early thoughts that we have on some areas of improvement that each team needs to make heading into the offseason, still very early in the process. But I think for some teams, and really we're going to get to every team in the NFL, but the areas of improvement I think are pretty grave and pretty noticeable in some spots where we can already pick it out. And I think in a lot of these situations, it's quite honestly just this one spot where teams need to get it right. Not a lot of teams need everything, right, to improve. A lot of these exciting teams with, I think, a lot of potential are only just a move or two away from making, that sort of breakthrough. And most of the NFC North, that we started last week with the Packers and just looking ahead, most of the NFC North made their way to the playoffs this past season, except the Chicago Bears, right? They finished with a 5-12 record, but they hired Ben Johnson as their new head coach. And there's a lot of excitement around what Chicago can be going forward, right? Now that they got the big fish in the market, right? They brought in the most sought after coach on the market. They hired him. Now he's with them, and now they're very excited to kind of usher in this new era with getting a guy that they usually don't end up with, right? The Bears don't usually make that sort of move where they go out and get a Ben Johnson, right? Some people were fearing that they'd go elsewhere and get, not to diminish Mike McCarthy or anything like that, or Pete Carroll, but it wasn't who the Chicago Bears wanted. And luckily for them, they pulled the trigger, they hired Ben Johnson, and now we look forward to see where and what areas Ben Johnson should try to improve with this team. And like I mentioned before, with some teams, it's not really a lot. And I think the Bears fit that category where I think their biggest need is just each of the lines, the offensive line and the defensive line. I think just improving that would make a pretty big difference, obviously, for these teams, right? And it's pretty simple because Caleb was the most sacked quarterback this year. In his first year in the NFL, he got hit the most times, and that's not how you want to develop your rookie at all, right? There was no protection for him. He was running for his life more often than not and having to put on a Herculean effort on top of, just trying to learn what to do and what not to do in the NFL, right? That evolution, that development was sort of stunned when you can't protect your quarterback, right? The number one overall pick. They did a terrible job of trying to protect him, quite honestly. So that needs to change. That's something that they need improvement on, more so than anything else, despite the fact that on the other side of the ball, Montez Sweat is their number one pass rusher, their main threat on the defensive line, and he only led the team with 5.5 sacks. So not that he's just doing it all on his own, right? I don't want to diminish the rest of their players, but you need some more production from that. And I think you need to spread out the wealth a little bit more because everyone's just focusing on Montez Sweat, rightly so, but you need some help along that defensive line to kind of make it more efficient so not everybody can just double or triple cover Montez Sweat. You need some other sort of threat to also rush the passer and get after them as well. So with Ben Johnson coming over from the Lions, one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, this is a non-negotiable, I think, for him and this offense. And free agency will be the first opportunity that they'll have at improving both of them. And they're very fortunate, I think, that both free agency and this year's draft, at least the way it's kind of shaping out to be from what I've read from the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl, seems to be very prosperous at defensive line of one of the positions, or even offensive line a little bit as well. And like I mentioned, free agency, not to get to the draft so quickly yet, but free agency will be the first opportunity for the Bears, and I'd love for them to go after a guy like Trey Smith, the offensive guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is set to be a free agent this offseason. Him and the Chiefs haven't come to any sort of agreement quite yet. So the fact that could be an opportunity, and I think Trey Smith might be only like 26 or 27. He's not that old at all. Still coming off of that rookie deal, obviously. I think if you bring him in to the interior offensive line right away, if we're scoring this like out of 10 points, that brings you up to at least like a 4, just him. If we're starting from 0 and you just add a guy like Trey Smith, you're already at like halfway there, I think, or very close to it, because they've never really had an offensive lineman to the level of Trey Smith. And at this age, kind of entering his prime is super exciting and a great opportunity that I would love for the Bears to go after. Also, you got another guy like Ronnie Stanley, a little bit older. I think he's 31 years old, but if you feel like you need an improvement at the tackle position, bringing in a veteran like that on a short-term contract, right, could be another option that they could look at. And Ronnie Stanley's still a very solid tackle, but just a little bit older, right? So that could be something that they go after. You got a center, potentially, in Drew Dahlman from the Atlanta Falcons, who would be another option if they wanted to improve the center position, obviously, or maybe he can move around to one of the other interior spots, but he's also one that could come on a cheaper deal as well for them. Then you look at the other side of the ball in free agency, like I mentioned, how this could be a very intriguing class of free agents in 2025. You start with guys like Josh Sweat, who could come in for them. Hassan Reddick could be another one. Milton Williams, and a lot of people might not know that name, but he's a defensive tackle for the Eagles, and he's a very good run stopper. He does a lot of the intangible things in the middle of that defensive line that go unnoticed, and I think he could be a nice addition. Oza Odighizuwa, I think, is going to be a popular name, not only with the Bears and improving their defensive line, but also I've heard the Commanders could be very interested in him with the connection to Dan Quinn and everything like that. Whoever gets him, he's been one of the bright spots for the Cowboys, and he's a free agent this year. So if the Bears or the Commanders could get him, would be a huge upgrade for them at that spot as well. And the Bears have, room to maneuver in free agency. They have the 6th most cap space at nearly $63 million to kind of work with here. So I'm hoping that they take advantage of that and make some moves and are aggressive in free agency, because I think that's what they need, honestly. So they could do that in free agency, but also, in the draft, they have the 10th overall pick. And around that spot, you got guys like Will Campbell from LSU, Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama, who could be another option for them. Maybe Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, but that might be a little bit too optimistic for him to be there at number 10. But you never know. That could be a spot too also. I'm expecting them to draft a lineman of some sorts with their first overall pick. So it's going to be someone, but who it actually will be, that depends on who's going to be there. I don't think they'll trade up or anything like that, but there's a ton of great opportunities this year to upgrade the trenches, it feels like, for the Bears. So I'm hoping they take advantage of it and are not like too bashful or kind of shy about going out there and upgrading. Like, go out there and be the first one to sign someone, right? Sign someone to a massive deal. If it's someone like Trey Smith, I don't have a problem with it at all, right? They need to find themselves in a spot where they upgrade that significantly so that they allow Ben Johnson, I think, to run the kind of offense, the kind of team that he wants to run in Chicago, right? Because they're very fortunate to have other pieces like Odunze, DJ Moore already there, Caleb Williams, DeAndre Swift, and a lot of good players on defense. So they just need all the foundational part of things, right? The foundation of a house, the tires on your car, right? These sort of things that you don't really think about too much, but the car or the house doesn't really work at all if you don't have these pieces. So that's why I think Chicago just really needs to focus on the trenches. It's their biggest need at this point in time, and if they could get that right, I'm not saying that they're going to jump to the top of the division, but we've saw them beat the Packers. We've seen them play close with the Vikings. We've seen them play close with the Lions. Like, I don't think that's just a coincidence by any means. I think they're right there. They have everything. They're just they were in a spot this past season where they weren't really led the right way, right? They didn't have that sort of guidance. So now that they do, potentially have that, this could be an exciting team that could find everything that they need, hopefully in free agency. So that's where I think the Bears should upgrade this coming off season. But we'll move on from that topic as of right now, and we got one more segment to get to on today's show. Just sort of a open discussion on the Buffalo Bills a little bit more, because their general manager Brandon Beane, made a comment last week that I thought was pretty interesting, and it made me think of this question, right? Are the Bills closer to the Kansas City Chiefs, and are they closer to just being around the conference title game each and every year, or are they closer to the rest of the field, right? Is it more unexpected at who's going to end up playing the Chiefs each and every year, or is it always just going to be the Bills, right? Are we always just going to assume it's going to be the Bills because it always feels like it is, right? I think that's a pretty interesting question that I came across, and we're going to answer it and just dive into it a little bit more to close out the show when we return.